Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another live session with Global Education and Training Institute as a part of hashtag Disruptive Education Movement. This GETI Live Talk Forum is an initiative by Global Education and Training Institute under Dr. Sunita Gandhi with the sole vision to transform education by sharing ideas for change. And we at GETI are committed to teachers' training and professional development to facilitate learning, teaching, and sharing wonderful ideas and next practices with the world. Well, as you know, this is the unique global movement that is the hashtag Disruptive Education Movement, under which we bring education leaders from around the globe to deliberate and discuss. So today we are back again with a guest, Dr. Gareth Bates, who is a senior lecturer of teacher education at the University of Bedfordshire in England. And he completed his PhD in chemistry before teaching science in school. And he has been working with the university for around 5 years and is researching the role of memory formation in pedagogic design. And today he is here with us to talk on the topic that says supercharged learning. So without much ado, I would request sir to please take over the session. And once again, a very warm welcome to you on this forum.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So just need to share the screen. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for attending and listening to me today. As Prina said in the introduction, I'll be talking to you around memory and in particular memory formation and our idea of something that my colleague, Dr. James Shea, called priming. So the first thing really that we sort of ask our teachers and our trainees and for you yourselves to think about is, is memory actually an important part of learning? And, if you think that memory is important for learning, then why is kind of the knowledge of memory, how memory works, helpful for learning and for future applications of learning? So this is something I'd like you to sort of think about as I talk, and, you can put some comments or ask some questions and hopefully that will be fed back to me so I can answer those or hear some of your comments. So just to give you a bit of background, in England now, the sort of profession of teaching is very interested in memory. So memory is really important, and in all our teacher education courses and indeed in schools, the ideas and knowledge of memory and how it links to learning is really important. And because of this, me and my colleague James are interested in how memories are formed in the first place. And I'll explain that as we go through. So again, these are some questions that we ask our teachers and our trainee teachers. So again, it would be useful for you to think about these now and then as we go through the presentation. And then it'd be also interesting to kind of get a sense of, did your thoughts change as I talked about priming? So, what actually is a memory? And is there kind of a difference between what a memory is and what memories are? And can you actually explain that? Can you actually explain what a memory is or what memories are? Are there different types of memories? And can we actually enhance our memory? And what does that mean? So these are questions that have been thought about for millennia by lots of philosophers, but with the sort of development of the area of psychology, these sorts of questions are prevalent and dominant areas of study within psychology as well. So something we're interested in, and this is the question that we ask ourselves, is, okay, so we have these memories, and we have architecture within our brain that holds memory. But how do these memories come into existence? What happens at the point at which we get some piece of information, and what's going on kind of on an actual sort of biological level? So psychology really is more interested in kind of behavioral output. So what is the response from the human when we do some sorts of tests, and then they use those results to explain or come up with a theory about memory. But we're really interested in what actually happens on a biological level, on a neurological and at a cellular level when memories are formed. So what we actually see is we get the stimulus. So something happens and our senses pick up something, and we call this the initial activation. So you get an activation of the process of forming a memory. But what recent sort of neurobiology research has shown is that you actually need a reactivation in order to form really strong memories. And it's this process that we're really interested in, to see if we can form strong memories in the realm of education, moving it out of kind of the science and moving it into what actually happens in the classroom. So if we just sort of pre-arm you with what I'm going to talk about, so it's similar to how a vaccine works. So, I mean, obviously, vaccines are a big worldwide sort of topic at the minute. So if you think about a vaccine, so you'll get given a vaccine, and what happens is that vaccine will produce an immune response. Okay, so your body notices it's a foreign invader and produces antibodies or white blood cells to attack that foreign invader. But it doesn't work just on that first vaccine. You need to give a second dose. Okay, so you need to have 2 doses, and then what happens is that second dose really sort of, you get this big explosion of the antibodies and the white blood cells fighting off that infection. So that's similar to what happens in memory formation. So you get this activation stage, but it's the reactivation where you get this supercharged learning effect. And this is why we call it priming and supercharged learning. So the key thing that we need to talk about is something called the ARC protein. So the ARC protein is a protein that has been shown to be sort of a pivotal controlling protein in the formation of synapses. So these are the junctions between neurons in which they sort of communicate, or you get the firing across the synapse, and this is how your sort of nerve impulses occur. And what the ARC protein does is increase the number of synapses on a neuron cell. So the more ARC protein you release, the more synapses you have, and therefore the more connections you can get between neurons. And it's this in a particular area of the brain that has been shown to lead to the memory formation. So what we get is an activation. So again, you get a stimulus, something that you need to learn. And what happens on a biological level, on the actual DNA, is you get a small release of this ARC protein. But what's really important is you can then reactivate this and get lots more ARC protein being formed. And this all happens kind of in the hippocampus. And like I was saying, this is neurobiology. Whereas in psychology, they look at it in a different way. And a lot of the stuff in psychology is looking around this idea of sort of memory reinforcement and sort of conditioning. So, what's actually happening in this priming process in the hippocampus? That's what our research is basically looking at and asking. So, as I've said, we've got this activation, and the key thing is once we get this ARC gene expressed on a small amount from the first activation, we actually get a structural change happening in the DNA. And it's not that there's just one ARC gene on the DNA strand. So there are many, many ARC gene areas on a DNA strand. And what this DNA restructuring allows is that we get more of these ARC strands sort of released or visible so that it can be read and more ARC protein is released. And what's interesting, what the paper shows is that this sort of active state, this where these ARC protein sort of genes are sort of released and more able to be expressed, what's actually happening is that state lasts for time. Okay, so the original paper did it over 5 days, but that's again something that we will look at is, how long does this active state actually exist for? So if you can activate or reactivate the memory during this time where we've got lots of the ARC gene available to express the protein, then this is going to lead to this supercharging effect. So rather than a small amount of ARC protein being released, we get lots and lots and lots of ARC protein being released. So it's really crucial that you are reactivating the memories at the right time, and that will lead to a much better, stronger early memory formation. So what's also interesting is, what actually happens if you don't do it. So if you think about sort of teaching in general, we spend a lot of time planning and delivering material kind of once. So we will tell children or whoever our learners are something once, and then we kind of expect them to remember it, or when it becomes relevant again, it may be beyond this reactivation window. So, we need to start thinking about when is the right time to reactivate. So it's not just telling our learners something once, it's actually reactivating it and telling them again, but doing it at the right time when you've got the reactivation event. So you are getting this supercharged release of the ARC protein. So what our research is looking to do is apply this sort of timeline. So on day one, so that's at the activation, is you obviously teach your learners something, and then this activates the ARC protein, that small release, but it also produces, it's called an epigenetic shift. So it changes the structure of the DNA, which then sort of releases more of these sites where the ARC protein can be released. And then we need to basically have a bit of a break. So if you sort of think about that on a sort of a biological level, the DNA needs to change shape. All of the biological molecules that are required then to read the gene sequence need to get into place, which takes time. So what we're saying is that you activate, but then you have a bit of a lag time to get to the reactivation stage, this point where you teach again and you get this supercharged release of the ARC protein. And currently we're sort of working on approximately between a 3 and a 10-day period. What our research will show is kind of, is that kind of correct, or is there a shorter window or even a longer window? And after that reactivation, that should then lead to a much stronger formation of memory. Okay, and that's what we're working on with our school. So what does that actually look like in the classroom? How do you activate, and then how do you reactivate, and how do you know that strong memories have been formed? What's also interesting is when we move it out of the science and then start talking about the classroom. Classrooms are complex environments, and lots can happen. So, to say that you're going to get a really strong formation of memory kind of requires that you've got conditions where there's 100% attention, your learners are present, your learners don't have some sort of way of some sort of difficulties or challenges where they may not be able to receive the information as efficiently as others. And what this gives us an insight into is that if things haven't been learned, is it that actually because the memory formation itself hasn't been made strong? So what we've actually done is sort of put into this system something that we call fractures. So it could just be something like inattention. So a child or a learner is there, and they just gaze out the window for a split second or even longer, and they obviously didn't pay attention to what you were saying, so the memory isn't formed. You could have absenteeism. So you teach something on a particular day, and somebody isn't present for being ill or whatever. So they haven't had that activation, or equally, they may have not been in the room where you've done the reactivation. So again, you're putting fractures into the system where you may not have formed strong memory. So now, you think that the support an activation stage, or do they need to be in order to gate fractures that are happening in the memory? So a new perspective, different insight into that we can give. So it's important or understand we have this learning timeline, and start to prioritize formation of memory. So like a lot of resource, time and effort is in teaching, is in sort of classroom settings, particularly that sort of first initial delivery of information, splitting that resource to both the activation and the reactivation stage of that learning timeline. And when we start to think about how well learning has taken place, assessing learning, we can now start to look at it through the lens of the strength of the memory formed, and look at fractures either in the activation or the reactivation stage. So it gives a very sort of different perspective and insight into what's actually happening in the learning of individuals. So we can apply this to other areas. So it's at university as well, and at schools. So do we need to start thinking about sort of curriculum design and the period of time when we start to revisit and reactivate our sort of memories, and it's following these sort of reactivation things that our memories are supercharged. And we're now applying this to our trainee teachers. So our trainee teachers learn stuff at university, so learn how to teach, but it's all well and good sort of learning the theory of teaching, but how does that then apply in the classroom when they are being teachers themselves? So something that we do on our course is that they have a university session on a Friday, and then they're in school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So using that priming principle, what we're doing is we are teaching them the content that they need to know on a Friday, and then they're going back into school on the Monday. So they've had this sort of natural lag time for the epigenetic state to be in place. And then through mentor meetings, the mentors are able to reactivate those memories and then look at it from a perspective of applying it to a classroom. But what's really important to recognize from the timeline is we are really only talking about that initial memory formation. We recognize that those memories still need to be stabilized. So what we mean by that, there's that sort of longer period of time where we need to be reinforcing, revisiting, rehearsing things to make our longer term memories more stable. Okay, so we're only really interested in that sort of initial formation. And as I was saying, we can now view barriers to learning through the lens or through the ideas of priming. So if you think about barriers to learning or why some learners have challenges to learning, not able to be as efficient or progress to the same extent of their peers, well, is it because they've actually got fractures in those memory formations? So rather than sort of looking at it from a diagnostic perspective, so here we've talked about, they could have an absence, as we said, a sensory impairment, so maybe visually impaired or like hearing impaired, might have a neurodevelopmental condition such as dyslexia. So we know these are things that prevent the same efficiency in learning. But rather than having that sort of diagnostic approach and having sort of pedagogic strategies that link to kind of overcoming that diagnostic medicalized view, we could have it through the lens that that there are fractures in the memory and there's fractures in the memory formation. So actually our intervention, the way that we're going to help these people is through looking at repairing those fractures either at an activation or a reactivation stage. And again, this is kind of new. It's a new way of looking at things that are happening in these complex environments known as classrooms. So some sort of things that you may want to think about then, if you know there's these fractures in the learning, is you need to start thinking about, right, is there a fracture because it's a fracture in the activation, or is it in the reactivation? So for instance, if it's an absence, you can clearly figure out if they missed a session where you were introducing something or if you were sort of revisiting something. So you can see that, okay, so they need a reactivation. If the length of time is too long, though, you may have to activate and reactivate again because the absence has been so long that the epigenetic state has sort of turned back to the normal state that the DNA would be. So it's the repairing of the fractures really relies on really good assessments and knowing where the gaps are, and then being skillful enough to recognize, is it an activation or a reactivation or a combined activation and reactivation that I need to do in order to repair these fractures. So like I say, it's offering a new view on barriers to learning. So what are we doing? What are we actually doing at the University of Bedfordshire? So basically in about 3 weeks' time, we will start this research study where we've got 40 schools, and that's across a wide range of ages, so from about 5 years old up to about 16 years old. And the idea is that with the teachers in these schools, we will develop a toolkit that will help enhance this supercharged priming process. Also, we are going to publish a book. So we're currently writing a book on just sort of the generalized ideas around priming and supercharging, because it doesn't necessarily just apply to teaching and learning. You know, this is talking about how memories in general are formed. So, you know, again, if you think that memory is really important, if memory is really important in everyday life, then you may conclude what I want to talk about today. So if you've got comments or any questions, if you're listening to this live, then I'll be more than happy to answer those now. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful presentation talking about memory formation. Well, we know students face these problems of memory. They have deficits in registering the information from short-term memory, and often have difficulty remembering the instructions or directions they have just been given. So I think you have explained the entire process very nicely. Strong memory formation is the priority. That was the line I can talk about. Strong memory formation is actually the priority. Enhancing the same is secondary. We first need to focus on the formation. As a term itself says, the structure and process where the storage is, where you're involved in the storage and subsequent retrieval of information. It's very simple.
Yes.
We wouldn't be able to remember what we did yesterday and what we have done today or what we plan for tomorrow.
Yeah. So again, if we look at the sort of context in England, you're right. The memory is becoming important in terms of teaching and learning in England, but you're right that actually the main approaches come from kind of psychology, and the research in psychology almost they work. Of course, they work, but they work on the assumption that there must have been a good memory of what you're trying to encode or put into your long-term memory. So,
right.
You know, if you think that's really important, then surely the formation of that memory in the first place you must be interested in. So that's why we say that strong formation has to be the priority. You know, the psychologists have shown that learning can be enhanced through psychological methods such as retrieval practice, but you know, you can only retrieve something if you've remembered it really well. So
Right.
so that's why we're saying that memory formation has to be
A
prioritized.
priority. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And yeah, you gave a very good example of how the vaccine works, the first dose, and you're
Correct.
not allowed to go for the second dose right there, but you have to wait for some time. You have to wait for that activation happening, and that structurization is done, and then you move on to the second, and so on. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that was a
exactly.
good example.
Yeah, so and really that's what this research will help us to understand. So again, because we're drawing this from neuroscience and neurobiology, obviously the research we're looking at is from laboratory conditions, obviously on other models, so not human models, obviously animal models. So how does that translate into humans, and like I say, in the complex environment of a classroom? So that's why the study is our research study is really important, because
Right.
you could read the papers and say, right, okay, well, this study says it's 5 days, but like I said, that's just a lab experiment. We don't know if that's true or not. So that's why we've kind of tentatively said 3 to 10 days, but the research will really help us sort of either say yes, that's correct, or no, actually, it's more like 10, 2 to 7, or whatever. So that's why
Right.
the actual live study in schools is really important.
Important. True. And I could see a question from viewer asking about, can NLP transform the strength and functional aspects of human memory and mind?
What's that?
So
Sorry. Oh,
the
sorry.
question,
Is that?
yes, can NLP transform the
Yeah.
strength?
I don't know if it's so. I think we've got to be sort of clear that mind is kind of a philosophical concept. So in to some extent, um, we're not really going to sort of talk about mind. So to us, mind is something very different, and it kind of sits in a different kind of domain. So I'm not too sure about the sort of functionality and the strength of mind. We don't know. That's a very sort of hard question to kind of answer. In terms of memory, yes. If you're looking at it from a purely sort of, like I say, biological perspective, um, then in theory, yes, the strength of memory should improve. So like I said, if you think about long-term memory, so the current sort of psychological thinking around long-term memory is that there's no capacity limit. It's endless. You can store
Right.
an infinite amount of information in your long-term memory. So why doesn't all the information that's ever been presented to you end up in long-term memory? Well, there is a stability question. So like we said, you still need to stabilize those long-term memories, but it
Right.
could also be that the memory was poorly formed in the first place, which leads to poor stabilization in the long-term memory. So I think that if you've got that strong memory formation, then the recall and the rehearsal sort of and those psychological techniques should become more efficient. And therefore, yes, I think from a purely memory perspective, I would say the strength could potentially increase. The mind question, I don't think that's a different domain to me. We're kind of not talking about mind.
Yeah, I think
That's
you
it's a
mentioned
nice
about it,
question.
how we can, in the period of time later, it is revisited through activation, reactivation, I would say.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, it's
It
the whole
is
process that's important.
supercharged.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So understanding how one thinks, remembers, acts as we are discussing, is in process, complex, when it's a process, going on process. And as the brain science says, to ensure the efficiency of the programs, uh, memory is superior cognitive process that defines the dimension of our mental status. The three levels we see in the psychology: ability to encode, store, retain, and then recall the information and past experiences. And you also talked about the barriers to learning and how one can diminish by understanding if the person is experiencing any gap in memory formation, and understanding that one can also diminish, can lessen the barriers as well. So I think, yes, it was wonderful having you, sir, on this forum and talking about this. It was a very informative session. Memory is essential to learning, but also depends on learning, because the information stored in one's memory creates the link to new knowledge by association.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, sir. I think I don't see any more questions, but your session was very informative. And thanks to you on behalf of our entire team for giving us your special time today and joining us. And we'll definitely try to connect soon with something more interesting to talk on. And
yeah, I mean, obviously, as the data and the results of the study start to come in, we can be...
Yeah, we're looking forward for your study.
Yeah, we can absolutely
all the very best.
Talk about that. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining in. And in case you have any questions for Sir, you can post in the comment section. He will definitely try to answer as and when possible. So yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, sir. Once again, take care.
Thank you.